Columbus steps onto the shore of the New World. History has no record.
It's very hard to believe that during preparation of the tasks to be performed, the NASA PR machine ignored this rather major detail, the planting of the first footprint. Especially as every single action and image had been planned in advance and rehearsed until it became automatic. Surely such a major omission would have been noticed and corrected before departure. And in the light of Armstrong's virtually reclusive post-mission behaviour, we can ask if the astronaut had personal reasons for being camera shy. Did he then, and does he now, feel some sort of guilt? Was he, in fact, never actually on the moon?
He's always been very helpful, but always struck me as being extremely businesslike. He responded to the point, he helped, and then that was it. So, quite typical.
Given the many crucial anomalies and inconsistencies we're unearthing in the Apollo imagery, we also have to ask again if Armstrong's central reason for avoiding the lens has to do with NASA's chosen procedures during the making of Apollo.
He was a very private individual, obviously, and since he has always kept himself very much to himself. During the various celebrations he's tended to appear, but it's as limited as possible, and if you might almost say decency allows.
Perhaps the Apollo space program would be better titled The Sound and Light Show, for what we actually hear or don't hear on the soundtracks is often inconsistent with both physics and the facts as presented to us. Just listen to this soundtrack as a bobsleigh team races down the famous Samaritz Bob Run. You can hear the pilot announcing the names of the corners they're negotiating.
That is the Corporal Wall. Next will be Snake 1 and Snake 2. And now is Sunny, Mesh and Dixon. And then is coming Horseshoe, Telephone, Shamrock, 3, Deep, Lock.
This is hugely exciting to listen to. We feel that we're virtually inside the bobsleigh with the team. Yet while this sport is no doubt enjoyable for the participants, it's also a highly stressful physical situation. Listening to the Bob pilot, we can hear the vibration and the tension engendered by the sheer speed and potential danger of the situation. Now let's listen to the two Apollo 11 astronauts landing on another planet for the first time in history.
Feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward. 75 feet. Car's looking good, down a half. 6 forward. 30 seconds. Lights on, forward. Forward. 40 feet, down 2.5. Picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drifting to the right a little. Contact light.
These intrepid men in their lunar module flying machine were virtually sitting on top of its descent engine, which was roaring away, producing up to 10,000 pounds of thrust and burning at a temperature of 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. We also know there was air inside the LEM. It was pressurized to 1/3 sea level atmosphere, so the incredible roar of the engine would have produced considerable sound and vibration. According to some sources, even through their bubble helmets, the astronauts in the LEM could hear the noise of the thrusters firing, yet apparently they couldn't hear the roar of this powerful rocket engine. That's a little difficult to believe, isn't it? Even the space shuttle astronauts popping up into low Earth orbit have pointed out the extreme vibration and noise when thrusters fire from their craft, and the shuttle is very different from that of the flimsy LEM.
Sunny,
Compare this
Mesh and Dixon.
with this.
75 feet. Car's looking good, down a half.
So unlike the pilot on the Bob run, the astronauts' voices on the Apollo 11 soundtrack sound unbelievably dull. There's no impression of vibration whatsoever, nor do we hear the roar of the rocket engine beneath them. Even more bizarre are the circumstances in this next scene from Apollo 12.
Just before these astronauts touched down, they were apparently able to film the Surveyor 3 craft that had landed at that same site in April '67. But instead of just catching a fleeting glimpse through the LEM's triangular window as the LEM continued on its descent path, this sequence from the conquest of space, using original NASA film, is very suspect. This result is wholly consistent with imagery that could only be taken with a specially mounted camera capable of considerable lateral panning capacity. As we run the sequence again, notice how the perspective of the grounded Surveyor 3 changes as the camera moves around it. The LEM didn't have that capability. To obtain such a shot would actually need a special camera and mount to give plenty of sideways movement, while the craft, such as a helicopter with the door removed, maintained level flight. Here is a type of helicopter rig that will be required in order to create the result in question. The published imagery is therefore not commensurate with the viewpoint from an onboard camera at the LEM's triangular window.
Apollo 12 also had sound and light problems. They suffered from what was claimed to be a failed TV camera very early on in their moonwalk. This failure had the happy effect of turning the transmissions into sound only, and thus ensuring that millions of terrestrial TV sets were switched off.
This is what viewers saw prior to the TV camera failure. By the way, here might be a blow on the whistle concerning the lighting at the time.
Boy, that sun's bright. That's just like somebody shining a spotlight in your hand. It really is. It's just like somebody's got a super bright spotlight in their hand.
And then a reference to the TV camera.
Now, see, I'm doing some useful work like getting that TV camera going. Okay, good idea. Okay, Houston, I'm going to move the TV camera now.
As the TV camera is moved, we can see that it is functioning, because the light source has generated lens flare. The camera is being moved around pretty rapidly, and we can see it is picking up flare and strange striations into the lens, which is allegedly the point to which the camera is supposed to have failed.
There it is.
And here is a clip from an official NASA documentary relating to this incident.
Set to watch the moonwalk on TV, controllers were frustrated when the solar rays destroyed the camera.
So according to NASA, the solar rays destroyed the Apollo 12's TV camera. But in this scene from a later mission, Apollo 15, we have precisely the same effect, yet the camera continues to operate perfectly satisfactorily. Now here, back with Apollo 12, we have flare picked up by the lens, which indicates that the camera was actually working. It is just pointed at something static. However, the camera is not securely locked into position, and therefore over a period of time the camera changes its view, as you can see. And as you can hear, everyone thinks it's all very funny. But as the fixing on its stand is not tight enough, the camera is slowly drooping, and this fact is demonstrated by the changing images captured over a period of time.
Coming in there now, Al.
It would not have been possible to see this differential imaging if the camera had really been destroyed by being pointed for a while directly into the sun, the official reason for its failure. The operations manual and the handbook that accompanied the TV camera clearly indicate that the camera should never be pointed at any bright source, nor directly at the sun. Given their intensive training and the experiences supposedly acquired over the preceding Apollo missions, why then did Apollo 16 astronauts need to ask Houston if they should point their camera at the sun during a lunar EVA?
Hold the camera away from the sun. There, all the way up and down. Yeah, the camera directly down sun. And down at the ground. That's right. Directly into the sun? Negative. Away from the sun and down.
We leave these sound and light anomalies for the moment to discuss one particular mission in April 1970, that of the lucky 7th lunar module, Aquarius, and the unlucky 13th command module, Odyssey. The alleged failure of the Apollo 12 camera had been a very good test for NASA and an indicator of the level of attention that America in particular, and the world in general, had towards the space program. Perhaps discouraged by Apollo 12's sound-only show, and given other political realities in America, the public seemed to have turned its back on space. However, Bennett and Percy's research suggests that this was an intentionally induced state of boredom and was also, among other things, good preparation for the moment when NASA intended to switch their audience back on again. And during the 13th hour of the 13th day of their 13th Apollo mission, how very remarkable, just 2 days out from Earth, they toggled that switch, and what was said to be an exploding oxygen tank jolted the command module and the Apollo story back into the media spotlight.
Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a BP bus vulnerable.
Here we see the astronauts inside the command module delivering a live broadcast. They're supposedly nearly 200,000 miles from Earth and just 8 minutes from their Big Bang, or problem, as they would delicately put it. Remember, the command module was named the Odyssey and the lunar module Aquarius. Listen to this communication.
And passing to the Timeway and our transit out to the moon. And it's rather odd to see it floating like this in Odyssey while it's playing the themes of 2001.
So shortly before the astronauts signed off, the music used in the film 2001 A Space Odyssey was playing in the command module.
It's rather odd to see it floating like this in Odyssey.
In that last comment, the astronaut emphasized the word odd for us. And just how apposite was it that moments before the explosion and the enforced extracurricular use of the LEM Aquarius, he takes the trouble to mention their sign-off song, a song from the musical Hair, in which the words, "This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius" figure. Not to mention when the moon was in the 7th house. Who exactly is blowing the whistle now?
And of course the tapes would be complete without Aquarius.
The whole of this scenario has all the hallmarks of a carefully written script. Indeed, the words used to announce their accident to Houston, "We have a problem," were first spoken in much the same circumstances in 2001, A Space Odyssey.
What doesn't come from 2001, nor indeed from the Hollywood movie Apollo 13, is the bizarre colour of deep space in NASA's footage of the Apollo 13 mission. When the astronauts have transferred to the LEM, some 200,000 miles from Earth, we look out of the small observation window and see the colour blue, not the black of space that NASA's astronauts describe. The official NASA footage has the LEM's triangular windows entirely filled with a blue as bright as that of a cloudless summer's day here on Earth. It's astonishing. If these astronauts really were some 200,000 miles away from Earth, surely the windows of the LEM should be entirely filled with the black of deep space.
Were they too in low Earth orbit, as appeared to be the case with the Apollo 11 sequence we saw at the opening of this program?
Following the accident, the claimed oxygen tank explosion, a crew member photographed the supposed damage to the CSM.
And there's one whole side of that spacecraft missing.
This is the damaged Odyssey. Now look at this picture of a command and service module with a cover removed from its scientific instrument bay. Looks rather similar to the damaged Odyssey, does it not?
Even supposing, as many experts claim, such an explosion would have thrown the spacecraft way off course, it seems that the Apollo 13 mission encountered more than just their exploding oxygen tank. Apparently, there would have been other problems too.
Fra Mauro is situated in the southwestern quadrant of the Moon, and what is of significance in relationship to this site is the position of the terminator, the line that marks the limit of the sunlit portion of the Moon. To be able to land on the Moon successfully, the LEM pilots needed to be able to see where they were going, and NASA has always emphasized that all landing sites and times were selected with this requirement in mind. But at the time of the Apollo 13 accident, their Fra Mauro landing site was in complete darkness, and, most significantly, it was to remain in darkness until long after the astronauts had left lunar orbit. This fact is clearly apparent from a computer reconstruction. And this fact can be checked with the help of a little rudimentary knowledge of astronomy and an ephemeris. But if you aren't mathematically inclined, don't worry, because the maths have been done and the results check out. It's also been confirmed by Andrew Chaikin, space historian and author of A Man on the Moon, which was written with the compliance of NASA, that concerning Apollo 13, Chaikin states, by Wednesday, April 15th, 2.5 days after the accident, the Apollo 13 combo had circumnavigated the Moon, corrected its trajectory, and was already 19,000 miles into its homeward journey. The Moon, still close enough to see craters with the unaided eye, and Fred Hayes, alone in Aquarius, was looking at it. And Chaikin tells us what Hayes saw, or rather, what he didn't see. Near the Terminator, just emerging from night, he could barely make out the highland region of Fra Mauro. So there you have it. The Fra Mauro site was in darkness on the date scheduled for the landing of this lunar expedition. Whatever might be the truth concerning the exact whereabouts of Apollo 13, the Sun and the Moon do not alter their dance through space.
These examples are only just a few of the anomalies that researchers Bennett and Percy have discovered concerning Apollo 13. However, the sample shown is already enough to enable us to further see that something's very wrong with this mission in particular, and the Apollo space program in general. We certainly have to conclude that the official data concerning this mission is unreliable. The author's opinion is that Apollo 13 was never designed as a mission to actually land, but as an exercise in space rescue systems, an exercise held principally for the education and the benefit of both crew and mission control, while still fulfilling an integral part of the overall space program objectives. While these researchers consider that most operatives at Houston and their contractors were ignorant of the detail, they suspect that, somewhat obviously, the astronauts themselves were fully aware of their location, in low Earth orbit and nowhere near the Moon.
As we know exactly where the Terminator was during the mission, why, in the NASA-approved Hollywood movie version of Apollo 13, which featured Tom Hanks, why do the astronauts declare themselves able to see their landing site at Fra Mauro when approaching the Moon on Tuesday, the 14th of April? As we know, it was in complete darkness, so they're apparently pretty clever. But they do better than that. They are then able to spot, within the next 13 seconds, two other sites, Tsiolkovsky Crater and Mare Imbrium, in that order.
Look, it's Fra Mauro. I can see our landing site.
Wow. Look at the Tsiolkovsky Crater. I can't believe how bright the ejecta blanket is.
It's like snow. It's beautiful. It's Mare Imbrium to the north.
They must have had X-ray vision, for this observation is a physical impossibility. How could they be flying over the dark, far side of the Moon and see Fra Mauro in darkness on the near side? And while the Sea of Tsiolkovsky was on the sunlit portion of the far side, it was well over 1,000 miles away. Then again, Mare Imbrium, on the near side, was mostly in darkness and again hidden from their view. So now, as we run that sequence again, note the trajectory of the spacecraft in relationship to the Moon.
Look, it's Fra Mauro. I can see our landing site.
Wow. Look at the Tsiolkovsky Crater. I can't believe how bright the ejecta blanket is.
It's like snow. It's beautiful. It's Mare Imbrium to the north.
So here we have even more inaccuracies in the movie account of the Apollo 13 flight. However, as a method of discouraging investment in long-term manned space travel, this space drama could hardly be faulted. Indeed, this accident was later heralded by certain astronauts and other personnel as the reason for NASA's curtailment and eventual abandonment of manned deep space flight. The prospect of dead astronauts indefinitely looping around our solar system, an artificial Death Star featuring in our night skies for eternity, surely was motivation enough for the implementation of the Apollo surrogate program.
Could it be relevant that the Apollo 13 landing site that never was took its name from the 16th century Venetian monk Fra Moreau, who was the instigator of a map that never was? Fra, or Brother Moreau, was also cartographer to the court of Venice, and at one time he set about producing the perfect map of creation without removing himself from his cell. He apparently achieved this feat by collating the tales that travellers brought to him, yet no trace of his map has ever been found. There's only his journal of this experience, which was discovered on a Venetian island by author James Cohen, who then translated it into English. This adventure in mind mapping raises important questions concerning the links between representation and imagination, and even the nature of reality itself. Cohen found that Fra Moreau's thoughts revealed themselves gradually as an unfolding guessing game, and that the Venetian monk liked to derive meaning from the perfect use of mystery, and thus each place he evoked became a symbol. We wonder what exactly the Fra Moreau site symbolised for those in the know at NASA. But Cohen's book on Fra Moreau is apparently a hybrid of history and fiction, and as such, it fits perfectly with our view of NASA's well-scripted Apollo program.
And with this pause for the consideration of artistic license over, we return now to more analysis of the Apollo mission images and shadow inconsistencies.
Resuming with Apollo 14, here's another one of those shots of an astronaut descending the ladder. The shadow side of the LEM has been filled with light in the same way as that of the Apollo 11 LEM during Aldrin's exit. Is this for real, or is this being simulated on a film set?
Okay. All kinds of freebies in today's simulations. Roger, we got the boys in the back room working overtime.
This terrain where these Apollo 15 astronauts are standing is virtually flat. Then, note that the shadow here is somewhat similar in length to the astronaut's height. But, as we all know,
shadows really make a difference up here.
Yes, they certainly do. So as we move to this next scene, during the same mission, on similar terrain, the shadow length should not be any different to the previous shot.
Okay.
However, we can see that the astronaut's shadow length is now considerably longer than his equivalent height. Such anomalies, in our view, are once again due to the presence of a large artificial light source that is not always positioned at the same height. We have found irrefutable evidence of just such a large light source in some of these images. Whether inadvertently or intentionally, we can see evidence of a large source mirrored in the astronauts' gold outer visors. This is how an artificial superlight might have been assembled, comprising a large number of individual light panels creating a single ultra-powerful source and generating one shadow. Not unlike the makeup of stadium lights, only very, very much larger. Remember, the Shea Stadium in New York had powerful lighting back in the 1960s. Here you can see a very large reflection of a large superlight in a convex gold helmet visor. It is still large despite the fact that the camera is some distance away. Now, a convex, that is an outwardly curved surface, always considerably reduces the size of whatever's being reflected. If this large bright reflection were the sun, given its distance from the subject, it would be barely visible when reflected in a visor, nothing more than a tiny pinprick of light. Yet in many cases these convex visors are reflecting a very large light, which indicates the use of a huge artificial light source. Let's compare these images depicting the large light reflections with this picture of a space shuttle astronaut during an EVA. The space shuttle operates at a distance a mere few hundred miles above the Earth. Although this photo was taken close up, we can see the sun reflected in the visor is nothing more than a pin source of light. And another example, this is an EVA during a Gemini mission. We can only conclude that the large reflections in these Apollo images really are telltale evidence that artificial superlights were used to illuminate these alleged lunar scenes.
So it would appear that the Apollo images reflect the circumstances surrounding the taking of such pictures, and this means that an artificial superlight appears to have been used for the recording of live on the moon TV coverage, as well as the photography. Again, we must ask ourselves if attempting to pass off this reflected light source as the sun is a sign of arrogance, or were the photographers blowing a very clear whistle. At this point one might say, hold on a minute, how did your alleged whistleblowers get away with all of this, right under NASA's nose? And why hasn't all this been noticed before now? Well, if you're not suspecting foul play, you're not alerted to the need for proof of foul play. As Hitler said, the bigger the lie, the easier it is for people to believe it. The authority of NASA was enough for us all to accept its images as the truthful depiction of the exploration of the moon in 1969. Because these visors just had to reflect the sun, didn't they? Now let's examine a hypothesis that is seemingly ridiculous. Could the entirety of the Apollo images have been created in the controlled environment of interior or exterior studio sets? As the sheer magnitude of achieving such a task without being discovered or denounced would appear to be beyond the bounds of possibility, most people are quick to laugh this hypothesis off as an example of conspiracy theory run amok. Yet before we dismiss it so readily, let's remember that it's initially easier to dismiss outrageous ideas even if they should eventually be proven correct. Simply because we might not want to face up to uncomfortable truths, and because to acknowledge that truth would make us look complete fools. It is apparently okay to acknowledge the lack of authenticity of the visual information surrounding an event safely buried in the relatively distant past, such as the sinking of the Lusitania by 3 torpedoes.
This event, which had the effect of bringing America into the First World War, happened out of sight of a British newsreel camera. But that detail didn't stop the media creating a fake scene, shot on a London pond, and presenting the result to the public as the authentic coverage of that incident.
As an example of the deliberate withholding of information at the turn of the century, we learned that the prime cause of the horrific accident that led to the demise of the Hindenburg was not hydrogen, as ruled after the accident, but it was actually the nature of the fabric covering the dirigible. It's now clear that this outer fabric was known at the time to have been highly inflammable. The fact that the constructors then continued to use a medium known to be potentially lethal is of no surprise to an industry that has spawned its own series of disasters.
And liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go and throttle up. Challenger, go and throttle up.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
And as we're finding out, what worked for the past masters of aeronautics is seemingly still valid. Would it have been possible to pull off the task of faking the record?
To create a set of stills and the TV coverage on the scale of Apollo would certainly require considerable resources. It would also need an exciting storyline full of dramatic events and human interest, requiring scriptwriters, actors and costumes. These would then need studios, cameras, lighting and of course sets. But we suggest that all preparations and making the pre-recorded TV coverage took place over such a long period and was so woven into the everyday life of the Apollo space program that even though this particular odyssey was made literally under the very noses of innocent employees and contractors, the fact that the final cut was phony went undetected at the time.
Returning to the matter in hand, Apollo and the moonwalkers, is there any evidence that mountain backgrounds used in the Apollo imagery could possibly have been multiple-use artificial backdrops?
There appear to be some blatant discrepancies in the location of the LEM in relation to the surrounding landscape in Apollo 17. There seem to be some serious multiple uses of mountain backdrops. Any given background can be the same size irrespective of the scale of the scene. This is often the case despite the varying distances that the photographers, their equipment and the LEM were supposed to be from any of these mountain backdrops. The EVA route at the Taurus-Littrow Valley, the areas where the two astronauts allegedly drove their roving vehicle and then walked on foot, extends many miles away from the landing site towards the lower region of this map. This is the landing spot at Taurus-Littrow. As the camera pulls back, we can see that all these mountains are located well away from the LEM's landing site. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to some rather peculiar features in the mountains of Taurus-Littrow that appear in the record. In the background is a rather distinctive mountain with a steepish slope on the left and a gradual slope off to the right. Centrally positioned is a light-coloured mound and an interesting mini crater feature inset above it. And over to the right is another mound with a larger, darker crater-like feature. We'll be seeing more of this mountain and the mounds in the sequences that follow. Here again is the light-coloured mound on the left, and in the centre the second mound with its larger, darker, crater-like feature. Notice in the left foreground are some experiment packages. And now with the LEM in the foreground, you'll recognise the mound with the dark crater-like feature. We have confirmation of the LEM's apparent close proximity to this location by way of this image as well. Note the two key features, the light-coloured mound on the left and the second mound with a darker feature to the right. But when we look again at the wide view of the valley with an astronaut standing by the large split rock, we can see there's no apparent sign whatsoever of the LEM in relation to the scale of the mountains we were looking at in the previous image. Here's another view, this time looking over Split Rock. Notice the crater in the centre, with no obvious sign of the lunar module at all. We now return to the Split Rock location, and an even wider composited image revealing an area to the right of the boulder. Surprisingly, this is the area in the centre of the picture where the LEM is supposed to have landed. Look how tiny it is in relation to the setting and the surrounding mountain landscape. What anomalous scaling compared with the close-up view of the LEM we saw earlier. As we bring the centre larger, notice how small the LEM looks in relation to what appear to be absolutely enormous mountains. Returning to the footage we saw previously, compare the mountains seen in the TV coverage with those in this still photograph. They're virtually identical, yet the LEM is absent from the still image and present in the TV coverage. Let's take a closer look at other imaging anomalies at this site and the continuity of the LEM in relation to its backgrounds. This wide view is looking across the Taurus-Littrow Valley with the distinctive mountain, the light-coloured mound and the little feature above it. Now as we mix through to the TV coverage, the LEM is clearly at the same location. Compare this still image, from which the LEM is absent, with what is obviously the same location where the LEM is present. Although the lighting has changed, the mountain is recognisably the same. All very surprising, because earlier we registered that the LEM was absent from this spot. We also noted that the LEM had apparently landed well away from these mountains. But in this TV freeze, we see exactly the same mountain yet again, with the LEM.
Have the mountains been moved to suggest a different location between one set of images and another, cost-saving on scenic backgrounds, or has the LEM itself been moved?
It looks as though the mountains were moved around. You see, money was no object with Apollo, so we must conclude that this action is a further example of intentional whistleblowing by those involved. I'm now going to run a 360-degree TV panorama sequence at that location. Identified as EVA-1, Site 1, it was shot from the rover's TV camera, remotely operated from Mission Control. Notice the shadow of the LEM in the foreground and the pair of mountains in the distance. But these appear to be mountains with unique qualities. We saw earlier that this distant view, seen on the TV coverage, is the location of the LEM, here in the middle distance. So how can the same view possibly exclude the LEM? As we continue with the panorama, we should return to the point where we started, with the distinctive mountain in the background and the LEM in the foreground. However, that doesn't happen, as we'll see. We can state with confidence that this part of the 360-degree panorama that we've extracted from another take, EVA2, Site 5, is intended to suggest a different location in the valley. But here's the distinctive mountain with a lighter coloured mound. And the LEM? Surprise, surprise, there's no sign of the LEM whatsoever this time. Either the LEM was moved away, or this is a studio set with movable mountain elements forming the background to the foreground action. These continuity discrepancies cannot be explained in any other way. The clue to ascertaining what may have actually occurred lies in establishing that the darker markings on the left-hand side of the background mountain are common to all these images. NASA would have us believe that these pictures were taken many miles apart, but if that were the case, the perspective of the mountains would vary drastically. On the contrary, the markings on the left side of the distinctive mountain remain constant. They're in the same place in relation to this steepish slope on the left, in every case. Put another way, in relation to this slope, these markings should move to the right as one moves further to the left of the valley. But the only noticeable difference is that this mound to the right changes its position, revealing the mound with a darker inset feature, but other elements of the scene do not substantially change in any of these views. Despite the fact that the LEM is supposed to have landed well away from any mountains, in the images with astronauts present, the mountain backdrops are never very far away at all.
So why do images with action in the foreground have backgrounds that appear so close?
No doubt this situation is the consequence of limitations imposed by working in a studio environment, without the benefit of backgrounds miles away, as would have been the case at the true location. It was possible, though, to create the illusion of a vast landscape for some of the impressive scene-setting imagery, especially the stills. Here again is the TV coverage of the LEM's supposed landing site, emphasizing that the location is nowhere near the mountains that form the backdrop to the previous images. This picture of the LEM, so close to its background, cannot possibly relate to the suggested location of the LEM in this image. The distant scaling discrepancies in the various backgrounds gives it all away. Yet more examples of inconsistencies in the record.
Is there any further evidence of mountains being moved around? And is it possible to detect any joins in the working area which could show telltale breaks, say, between the studio floor, the surface area and vertical mountain background?
Yes. In virtually every case, whether stills imaging or TV coverage, we can see just such a join line between the key elements, the horizontals and the verticals. In our view, had these images been taken in a natural location, this obvious join line would not be in evidence. And here in this illustration, you can clearly see how the working area and the mountain background with its supports would be separated, resulting in just such a join line showing up in the images as an obvious break. Rather significantly, in the 1971 James Bond movie, Diamonds Are Forever, when Bond penetrates the Willard White tectonic site in the desert outside Las Vegas, Nevada, he eventually finds himself on an interior moon set, surrounded by 3 separate levels of movable flats depicting lunar mountains. We also see the wooden supporting structure of these mountain backgrounds. A gallery full of sound, light and computing equipment, as well as actonauts practicing slow-mo movements.
Get him off that machine, that isn't a toy.
And finally, when Bond escapes on a hybrid of a rover and a LEM through the flimsy wall of this moonset, we see that he's emerging from the grey-domed building that looks remarkably like the northern hemisphere of the moon. This entire scene is, without doubt, whistleblowing on a very grand scale.
So, David Percy considers that Bond sequence to be whistleblowing. But surely one scene in a film does not a true story make. This single scene could be construed as an amused nod of the head on the part of the filmmakers to the Apollo hoax theory that was already circulating by 1970. That having been said, there's no doubt at all that author Ian Fleming had his finger on the pulse of world events. Through his intelligence contacts, he kept abreast with both Soviet and American rocket technology and received technical updates and advice from the British Interplanetary Society.
It is quite clear that Diamonds Are Forever contains information as to how the Apollo, witnessed by the world, was actually staged. Either the whole film script was totally inspired, or someone in the know clearly seeded information into the film. For although the original book storyline would have worked very well for the movie, new situations were grafted onto Fleming's principal locations. This film contains a multitude of relevant covert references to the anomalies in the Apollo program. Another example concerns the dangers of radiation. In a very memorable scene, immediately prior to the interior moon set sequence, in Diamonds Are Forever, Bond highlights the subject of radiation.
Hello.
Hi.
Haven't seen you here before.
I'm Klaus Hergesheimer.
New here.
I've been here 3 years. G-section.
How are things in G-section?
Still the same old grind, you know. Checking radiation shields for replacement. Hey, by the way, where's yours?
I've been waiting a couple of days for you guys to deliver them.
Oh, gee, I'm sorry. You should have given us a phone call. Yeah, look, I've got one here. Lucky for you, I carry spares. Now, you keep that on. You can't be too careful about radiation.
Absolutely. I feel much safer with this on.
See you around.
Who are you? What do you want?
Klaus Hergesheimer, G-section. Just checking on radiation shields. Now, let me see. You are...
Professor Dr. Metz. Our shields are fine. Now get out.
Thank you very much.
We will be looking at the hazards of space radiation later in the programme. The movie Diamonds Are Forever is confirmation, though, that some works of fiction can communicate vital clues. Producing an Apollo sound and light show in a studio would naturally imply the use of moving image creation and sound recording facilities.
Using conventional motion picture film for the pre-creation of the live TV coverage would have been very risky, as film could easily get scratched or even break during transmission. The best material for the purpose would have been videotape. This was not widely used in the 60s, but it was in use by NASA and the US government. Using an emerging technology would enable the perpetrators of a hoax to pull off the trick with impunity. Don't forget, in the 1960s, the networks had to film off TV screens during the transmissions. Today, this is an aspect of the Apollo story that many engineers and producers find highly suspect. The best result would have been to provide the networks with a direct video feed, but they did not do that.
So we now have to ask, could early video equipment have been used in the generation of the live TV coverage of Apollo?
We did use early videotape machines, Ampex VR660, and later on an Ampex VR1100, the quad tape machine. And we kept those tapes on site for quite a long time. We received that FM carrier down on the Earth, ran it through an FM demodulator, and processed it in an RCA scan converter that took the slow scan picture and converted it to the American standard black and white television signal, and then sent that on to Houston. When we were converting from slow scan to fast scan, RCA used the disc in the scan recorder as a memory, so it played back the same video several times until it got updated video.
In other words, the incoming signal was recorded onto a magnetic disc for black and white TV. And for colour, it had first to be recorded onto tape recorder 1, then played back on tape recorder 2. Only then could there be a conventional colour TV picture.
The idea that what we all saw on our screens in July 1969 was actually live from the moon recedes by the minute. Are there any indications that the moonwalk sequences were actually filmed on Earth under studio conditions? And how difficult would it have been to simulate the moon's 1/6 gravity?
Researchers have noticed that when the rover was filmed driving across the dusty surface, the dust thrown up by the rover's wheels clumps, just as it would if it were driven in a location where there's an atmosphere. Had the rover really been performing in a vacuum, the lunar conditions, not only would the dust have sprayed out in a perfect and progressive parabolic arc, but due to the reduced gravity, this arc would have risen up to 6 times higher than it would have done on Earth. This Apollo footage records the dust actually being stopped in its tracks as it encounters an atmosphere.
The moon has a much lower surface gravity, like it's 1/6 of the surface gravity on the Earth. So pictures of falling things, you see things falling slowly, and you see people moving about as if they don't weigh very much. So faking these motion pictures, and remember that many of the pictures returned from the Apollo project were motion pictures, that really show people operating in an environment where they and their equipment weighs about 1/6 of what it would on the Earth. So it's really very difficult to fake in a studio on the Earth, where the gravity would of course be normal.
In the 1999 revised edition of Apollo, From the Earth to the Moon, an astronaut is heard to say, "There's no dust at all," which is only possible if the exercise is taking place on a hard surface.
9 miles an hour. Like you see, I'm going to have to keep my eyes on the road.
However, there are carving lines through the loose surface coating.
Up a little rise. There's no dust at all. Steering is quite responsive.
And if there are tracks in the surface coating, then there should also be significant movement of surface material arcing out from under the wheels of the rover. In this respect, the new sequence is in direct contrast to the original 16mm Apollo camera footage. The statement, "there's no dust," doesn't even belong with this action, but with the earlier arrival of the LEM. The rewriting of the record, for which there is allegedly already authentic documentation, does not in any way help to preserve the real credentials of the original. It only demonstrates that in a probable attempt to avoid the scandal of the millennium, NASA has chosen to support a revised edition of Apollo. But in our view, the agency has chosen poorly. Astronauts moving in slow motion is another hallmark of the Apollo TV footage. There is no evidence at all of any astronaut making a leap or a jump anywhere near a height commensurate with 1/6 G possibilities. But if they were actually simulating EVAs on Earth, they would then need help with their bulky heavyweight suits and backpacks in order to achieve the visual effect of moving around easily in lunar gravity. So enter wire supports. This is a tried and tested way of relieving weight from performers, or even flying an actor. Here's a sequence from one of our own productions.
Excuse me, will I need a car?
Relax, Chris. We're only making a short journey back to 1969, to the beginning of universe.
Of course, confirmation that wires were used is in the detail. Here in this Apollo 14 footage, you can see a ping, a momentary glint. And again, run slowly. And once more. There are other examples too. This one is from Apollo 17 during the flag scene. You can see the ping at the top of the frame. In this footage from Apollo 16, we have telltale evidence of a slightly floating or dangling effect at the jump salute location. It's as if the weight is being taken off the astronaut's feet just a second or so too soon. Compare that sequence with an obvious rehearsal rig. The dangling effect is very evident. And here again, from the same mission, Apollo 16, we have an astronaut who is about to get up.
Okay, here we go.
"Let me give you a hand," he says.
There goes bag. There goes another bag. Coming.
Look at it again. The astronaut is getting up with the wire taking the weight, relieving him of 5/6 of the Earth's gravity. A magic trick? No, just the help of a wireman. This is a slow-motion jump that would have been seen live on TV. And here it is at normal speed. The well-rehearsed, pre-recorded material was apparently slowed down by 50% when we saw it on TV. And yes, we've done the necessary work to establish that percentage.
How was the slow motion effect achieved?
Well, creating these 1/6 slow simulations would have been a relatively straightforward process. First, the scene would have been photographed and recorded onto videotape at the normal rate in the US, 30 frames per second. On playback, the recording would have been slowed down to half speed. As each video frame is made up of 2 different fields, this will give 60 different frames of image per second, because each individual field now becomes a frame. We must remember that the live TV transmissions were filmed off TV screens for posterity. The archiving of the Apollo moonwalks was on 60mm film, just like this. Movie film has an entirely different makeup to that of a videotape recording. Film only has frames and not fields. So when the resulting footage was filmed off a TV screen, the fact that the playout of the original video was slowed down to half speed would have gone totally undetected and remain virtually undetectable. Now this is how the jump salute would have looked at normal speed before being slowed down by the method just described. Looks rather like it would on Earth, does it not? The video equipment used in Apollo was early generation. Therefore it would have been recorded onto 2-inch tape, the state of the art in the 1960s.
If you remember, there was a beautiful piece of footage from the Apollo 15 mission where the astronauts demonstrated the surface gravity on the moon by holding a hammer in one hand and a feather in the other. Now, it was proved in physics a long time ago that objects fall at the same speed, doesn't matter how heavy they are, and a feather will fall at the same speed as a hammer. And the only reason that the feather doesn't fall at the same speed as a hammer in this room is because the resistance of the air in the room slows down the feather. If you do this experiment on the moon, they both fall together. As this piece of footage that shows this done by the camera pointing at the astronaut, dropping the hammer and the feather, and sure enough they both fall together, and that proves immediately that this experiment was done in a vacuum. So this movie set would have to have been evacuated. It would have to be a vacuum. But more than that, the 2 objects fall slowly. They would fall 6 times faster on the Earth because the gravity is stronger. You see them fall slowly on the moon.
And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather for our falcon. And I'll drop the 2 of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that?
This is also a very difficult image to fake.
Well, actually, it isn't at all difficult to fake. NASA itself would repeat the very same trick, this time officially in the 1999 story From the Earth to the Moon. This time the astronaut held the hammer the other way up, so that we could see it was not the same fakery as the first time. Of course, that original demonstration by Apollo 15 doesn't in any way prove that it had taken place on the moon. Before NASA reenacted the whole thing officially, we had already conducted our own experiment. Here we are in our London studio in 1G, complete with an atmosphere, and without the benefit of a vacuum chamber. There they go. As you can see, the feather and the hammer arrive on the ground at the same time. Now if we slow it down by the appropriate amount, lo and behold, these 2 items fall nice and slowly as per a 1/6 G environment. This illusion is all about calibration.
Following their research, Bennett and Percy have arrived at a firm conclusion regarding the reason for the anomalies and inconsistencies found in both the stills and TV coverage of Apollo.
All the apparent mistakes that we've observed are, in our view, deliberate. We think it's very possible that some of those who were involved in the design and execution of the sets, the photography, lighting and production were perhaps very distressed when they realized what they were expected to do under the guise of service to their employers and their government. For NASA is a government agency, and their contractors grade their staff with security clearances in the same way as the military do. It is possible that instead of courting what could be life-threatening danger by standing up and blowing a whistle in public, these brave souls encoded their work with deliberate mistakes that would be detected sometime in the future, long after the emotion of the event had cooled.
What does Una Ronald, who was in Western Australia at the time, think about these attempts at fakery?
When I saw the Coke bottle, for me, the whole moon landing from that point was a fake. It was a setup. And if it was a setup, it must have been filmed somewhere on Earth. And it would have been filmed, to my way of thinking, in America, at some lonely site, or alternatively in a huge indoor set, somewhere where they could be private, be secluded, be able to produce this quite passable picture of someone walking on the moon.
Most of us will recall that famous movie Capricorn 1, featuring 3 astronauts who are hoisted out of the launch rockets at the last minute to be informed that the technology won't get them to Mars safely. So in the interests of maintaining the space program, they must take part in the simulation of their voyage to Mars. Less well known is the fact that one of the originators of this storyline was Bill Kaysing, and that the destination of the original story was not Mars, but the moon.
People at an extremely high level came up with the entire simulation, which was then filmed in Las Vegas in Area 51 at the northeast corner of what used to be the Atomic Energy Test Station there, and also at Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino.
The convincing evidence presented so far in this program strongly suggests that the TV coverage and the photographic record of Apollo is faked. How does NASA respond to these findings?
You're coming to NASA, which is the organization that's being accused by this person of having put together the most monumental hoax in the history of humanity. I would simply say if this person or any people believe that they have some sort of, stunning, earth-shattering scientific finding that proves we didn't go to the moon, don't bring it to us. Take it to the scientific community. Take it to the Royal Academy.
The big question must now be, why did the Apollo imagery have to be faked? Could there have been technological problems in leaving Earth orbit and actually arriving at the moon in the first place? After that, it would have been necessary to achieve a safe landing, a moonwalk without accidents, a safe departure, and an extremely difficult re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. If all of that was achieved, then splashdown was a relatively minor detail. Experts are of the opinion that a serious failure in any one of these phases could have jeopardized not only an individual mission, but the entire future of the space program. Was there a compelling reason for the faking of the Apollo record?
Apart from the radiation risks, there are, in all probability, magnetic and gravitational anomalies that make the whole business of landing and taking off from the moon very dangerous indeed. And perhaps the consequences of these mascons, massive concentrations of gravity, and other anomalies would have made acceptable visual images difficult to guarantee, so that in any event, imagery would have to have been created before and independently of any given mission.
Some think it highly likely that surrogate astronauts were actually sent to the moon, while the named NASA astronauts were obliged to play out the role of space heroes, far nearer to home, remaining in the relative safety of low Earth orbit. As actors in a drama, the named astronauts represent a great achievement of mankind, whilst others unknown travelled beyond the confines of their home planet for the first time, to all intents and purposes naked before creation, as we shall see in a moment.